Hello, and welcome to Fireside with a VC. My name is Andrew Romans, and I'm very excited to have Nate Rosenstock, co-founder of Crafty, on the podcast. Nate, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So Nate is one of our, full disclosure, one of our portfolio companies we've invested in. And Nate and Ishan, his co-founder, and there's four co-founders, but the two of these guys were at McKinsey, I believe. And I love a founding story. So we're going to get the real founding story, but I think you guys were working together at McKinsey and you were looking at what the annual spend was of McKinsey on beer, which I think you're not legally allowed to disclose, but it was a sizable enough number to think of changing your business model and starting to get a side hustle of putting kegs in corporate work settings, which sounds like maybe a good idea or a bad idea, but
Yeah.
maybe tell us about the start of Crafty, and then we'll get into how you survived COVID and built the business to where it is today.
Yeah, sure. So originally Crafty by name was all about craft beer being shipped to consumers' homes. It was a birch box for beer model. And at the time, Ishan and I were working at McKinsey. Box businesses were all the rage. And so we sought to pursue our entrepreneurial dreams and start our own box company. The first step in that process was getting a liquor license, which we got. And in talking to our friends at McKinsey, they kindly offered for us to sell them beer for their happy hour program. McKinsey had a huge, Friday ritual where everybody from traveling across the country would come back into the office, get together, go into one of the lounges, have a great happy hour. Analysts could talk to partners and associates, and it was this great sort of melting pot for a company where most individuals are sort of working in projects all across the country. When they offered us to sell them beer, the first question was, sure, how much do you spend every year on beer? And the number was substantial. And we sort of our ears perked up, and we quickly realized that there's a pretty big opportunity for corporate spend on beer. And we thought it was an untapped market. And so we quickly pivoted away from this birch box for beer model, which the unit economics of which were terrible anyways. And so we shifted into this corporate lens, and that put us on our track.
I mean, a lot of startups along their path need to decide, are we going to be B2C? Are we going to be B2B or B2B2C? And sometimes in economic downturns, you see people start going for B2B because you just make a sale and you like lock in some revenue. You can pay for employees with that. And sometimes B2C, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, B2C was, there was no internet or something, that to build an actual B2C brand and fight Coca-Cola or something was, everyone had to have that $60 million Series C to even make a breakaway. Whereas today, it's a different story on, cost of acquiring customers and all those tactics. But so you started going down this B2B path, but weren't you at McKinsey for quite some time while you kind of built up a bit of a business where you were, changing out kegs in various places?
We did, yeah. So we were probably, covertly working two jobs for about maybe 6 months. Okay. And when we did eventually launch the business, we had fully departed from McKinsey. And so, our first delivery, which took place on December 1st of 2015, we had officially left McKinsey back in August or September.
Oh, okay.
But when we kicked off our business, we were doing everything ourselves, which is the classic, startup story. But I remember there's a very funny moment where, we were listening to, I think it was a podcast, that How I Built This on Instacart. I think that's the one it was. And we heard the interviewer, Guy Raz, ask the question of, when did you stop doing deliveries, or how many deliveries did you do? And the founder basically said I basically did 1 or 2 deliveries, and that was it. And at this point in time, We're doing deliveries every day. We're running around like crazy. And we were like, God, we really have to get out of this operational mindset and operational model, because we bootstrapped it for the first year. And the business model at them was very asset light. Of course, we were not paying ourselves, but we had to start thinking bigger about how you scale a company versus how you just sort of maintain costs.
Right, right. So when the business started, just describe to me what was the value proposition? You were knocking on doors for other companies. What kind of companies were you going to other than the mothership of McKinsey?
Yeah, it turns out it was all, companies of all shapes and sizes. Anybody who believed that the employee experience is more than just working, but that connectivity and culture can be developed and fostering a better employee experience and using food and beverage as that strategic tool. So when we started, it was all around the kegerator and kegs and providing the service as well as the products. So it
Okay.
was line cleanings and it was, the marketplace of having great selection and building relationships with clients. They continue to give us more opportunities to grow our categories. So we went from doing just beer to doing beer and wine to doing beer, wine, and coffee. The kegerator phenomenon in companies is a real thing, where there was a point in time that every company wanted to have a kegerator to sort of create the new modern water cooler effect.
Yeah.
And so everything started going on tap. And we definitely rode that wave for a couple of years, but continued to expand into new categories, change the way that we operate, going from fully outsourced to then fully insourced, launch your own warehouse, having our own delivery vehicles and doing all of that in Chicago until really going up to the pandemic. We built a full service operation that was very technology enabled. We're one of the few providers in our industry that have a tech team and have developed new software tools, but it was at that point entirely a full supply chain operation.
And so so 6 months after McKinsey, you make that first early December delivery of a kegerator with the beer and all that. When did you start getting into everything else though? Like, starting with just food, right? So the food came really fast.
Yeah, food happened pretty quickly. We, I think it was in late 2016 that we started providing snacks. And our strategy was, we've got great client relationships. Are there ways to activate more of their budget and capture a larger share of wallet? And so adding new categories, basically what we call it, putting more stuff on the truck was an easy way for us to grow. And so we started focusing purely on new categories, even more so than new customers at the time. That of course, was still a focus. But that happened in early 2016 or late 2016, actually. And then in 2017, our technology tool started becoming really the forefront of our sales pitch. And it was at that point in which we were able to take on some really large companies. And so we started working with Yelp in Chicago and WeWork in Chicago and Sprout Social in Chicago and some of these larger companies who saw that we were developing great tools and that we could put their program on a pathway to being really industry leading by partnering with a provider in the industry that has a positive future.
So I'm going to ask a question, but first tell a quick story. We had this one venture capitalist that was on my board when I was an entrepreneur in the 90s. And he shows up, he's walking around. We have a 10,000 square foot office in Tyson's Corner, Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington. And he opens up the refrigerator in this little area and it's packed. There's got everything. We even had Jolt for the hell of it, right? We had every kind of caffeinated whatever drink. And he goes, "This is free." And he really says, like, "This is my money." You're just like, "This is how you're spending the venture financing." And I'm like, "Danny, the more we can make these people want to stay here, the better, right?" We want them to, stay on campus, as it were. Like Google offers massages, and that's probably, years later, get your teeth done, have a on-campus vet or something. But is the pitch when you get to a company the size of Google, like I know a woman who's the head of food at Google, you know what I mean? It's like, they're doing everything themselves. When you get to the WeWork zone or the Yelp zone, at some point, are they thinking, we're not good enough at this to fight the talent war? Or are they thinking, you guys have economies of scale and what young people are drinking for beer where we would have given them Heineken not knowing any better? Like, why would they go with you when they're kind of big themselves?
Yeah, I mean, very few companies are doing it themselves because there are, sophisticated levels of technology and process that can unleash value to the employees. So, like employee engagement tools is a big focus of us. That Yelp isn't going to build their own employee engagement tool to, navigate the food and beverage offering across all of your campuses. But when it comes to why they do it in the first place, I mean, you hit on Google, which was the first provider really to do this in a large way. And the focus was culture and connectivity. The idea that two people colliding could come up with a great idea while waiting in line for their cup of coffee. And I think the story of Google News is exactly that, which is that when September 11th happened, two employees were waiting in line for their coffee at their barista, and they were talking about how they wished they had news in a single feed so that they could see what the various articles were doing. And that was the birth of Google News. And there's a lot of examples like that. And so ultimately why companies do this is because food and beverage has a massive ROI,
Yeah,
in terms of
I've
culture and everything.
I've heard that one of the Steve Jobs stories is when he was designing, the new Apple campus in Cupertino. He purposefully made you have to walk all the way to the atrium to find like a restroom, and there was a pregnant woman who needed to go to the bathroom frequently. Walking 11 minutes each time was complaining, and Steve Jobs is like, "Yeah, no, I'm not changing that. I need people to I need that department to bump into that department to get crossover, birth of good ideas. The more internal communication we can foster, the better." And so he took that pretty seriously.
Yeah, I saw a quote from Jamie Dimon on Twitter, I think this morning, that said that, fully remote is, the death of idea generation.
Yeah.
Because, I think a lot of executives really believe in that power of collisions and people coming together to spur new ideas. And, how does innovation happen is a big question, especially when you think about the fully remote model. So there are executives who are pushing against that for those exact reasons.
And, even going back to McKinsey, where, the model is build these people out for more than we're paying them, almost that pyramid scheme of a consulting business, in professional services. If they're traveling Monday to, Sunday night, Monday morning till Thursday night or something, to get them in on a Friday was even more important, it would seem. What are best practices for companies across your, because you're probably servicing a lot of different clients that do it lot different ways. You don't have to say names, but having a keg and a bunch of different types of food and nuts and whatever in these kitchen areas, what are you seeing people do in the way of happy hours? We'll talk about real world first, and then, in a pandemic or hybrid work environment.
Yeah, because those lessons are the same, right? Where McKinsey was competing over getting people to come in on a Friday. Now companies are trying to win that same battle of encouraging people to come in, especially if they're offering flexibility. So in terms of what companies are doing, food and beverage is of course a piece of it, but it isn't the whole puzzle. A lot of it too is around events and engagement. And I think once the pandemic restrictions are lifted, this world of, events and sort of in-office activity is going to be a bigger thing. But we like to think about connectivity and bringing people together and engagement, but we also like to think about convenience. And all of these amenities are providing convenience to the employee that they might not get at home. And so if a great cup of coffee or a lunch taken care of or some snacks is a convenience, great. If a laundry service, if daycare and babysitting are levels of convenience that somebody can't get at home, those are things that I think are going to spur up more commonly in the future. The largest companies already do that, but figuring out models where small and medium-sized businesses can also provide these amenities at scale to their employees is going to be a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I've been an entrepreneur pretty much my whole life, and sometimes you're checking into some hotel and they say, "Do you have," or like at healthcare, like you want to join a gym, and they're like, "So, do you work at IBM or one of these huge employee places, and I can give you a discount?" And I've always said, like, why can't startups all pile in together and be able to get these discounts? But it's interesting for how in a talent war and people are at different phases of their lives, how do the big companies compete with the allure of working for a Crafty that's growing like crazy and has an amazing culture? So I've seen like VMware. We've got a bunch of LPs that just work at VMware, so angel investors really, and they're giving tours to our Japanese LPs. And I was like, what's going on here? And it was Halloween is like the greatest time of year in Silicon Valley. The weather gets warmer. It's kind of magic fall. And they had like Gwen Stefani putting on an entire concert just for VMware employees on campus. So I mean, they're doing whatever they can to compete with startups to get talented people to work there.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the more interesting roles in this war too is on the building side and on the real estate side, because you talk about having the gym. The company might be able to have a gym if they've got a massive campus, but in so many ways, and thinking about that shared services view, building amenities are going to be one of the huge ways for small and medium-sized businesses to offer these perks without needing to pay for them in full. So if your, building or property manager is offering a gym or offering a cafe, offering daycare, it makes going into your office that much easier. And your company is technically paying for it because I'm sure it's baked into their cost per square foot, but they're not managing it directly. And that takes a little bit of the workload off of their plate.
Yeah, I've seen like Zoom Ride came along and said, we will do the school pickups for your kids. So you're not distracted with a 3 p.m. Oh my God, do I tell my boss I've got to go pick up my kids and drop them off at soccer practice? And so literally the employees were taking on a certain amount of Zoom Ride cost to de-stress their employees. So let's talk about the pandemic hitting. I mean, I remember you guys were crushing it. You had something like 130 employees. What can you, some of this is confidential, but tell us about where you were when all of a sudden the pandemic changed people not going to the office at all.
Yeah. So the business was really rocking and rolling. And when we launched the business, we like to joke about this. When we launched the business, the only assumption we made was that people go to the office. And it turns out that was not the case anymore. And so that was a big surprise to us, as it was for a lot of people. But as a workplace service provider at that time, of course, we've launched a remote service line since then. But at that time, as a purely workplace provider, it was extremely difficult. It was, for us, almost a complete shutdown. Some of our clients are essential businesses, and so there was a little bit of activity, but we did have to go through a couple of layoffs, which were extremely painful. And for first-time entrepreneurs, which are our founding team of four, myself, Ishan, Chris, and Jimmy, we didn't have experience of having to do like large-scale layoffs, and so I think emotionally it was extremely draining for us. And for the entire team, it was a challenging time.
I mean, even at McKinsey, you were never McKinsey brought in to fire people. So this was really all first time.
It was, yeah. And I've actually never been a part of that. So I don't even know if McKinsey is really doing that directly, but in any case, it was a first experience for all four of us. And to add salt to the injury, we were at the end of our cash cycle. So we had just signed a term sheet with a really reputable investor, and we were excited to do our Series A and continue to grow. And we had just signed a term sheet, but then when COVID happened, everything shut down. Of course, that needed to stop as well. And the focus for us was first and foremost survival, which is why we did have to go through some of those layoffs and furloughs, and also cash. And so we were very fortunate to have really great existing investors. We got some financial support from existing investors. The investor that we had a term sheet also contributed money extremely generously of them.
Yeah, and so, can I just say, like, without divulging anything, I think we can say they actually wired 10% of what they were gonna do, and they said, "Look, this is a screwed up situation, obviously, but we believe it'll end eventually." I thought that was a very cool move. That they did that, and every single dollar counted at that time.
Yeah, unquestionably. I mean, it was a time in which we expected zero,
of course,
and we would have completely understood, frankly, because that's the way it goes. But They were extremely generous and said, look, we don't know what's happening. Nobody does. Here is, 10% of the investment. We believe in you. We believe in you, and you are going to become a member of our portfolio. We're going to provide additional support. This isn't like a take a check and disappear either. They're they're continuing to support us in many ways. And that was a wonderful thing. That was a wonderful thing. And existing investors were there as well too. And that's the beauty, of having investors, is that level of support and guidance through those extremely unpredictable and difficult times.
Yeah.
But, financially, we sort of pulled it all together in the sense that, we're here today, and we got enough support through investors. We made enough difficult decisions around cost reduction. And we also had some government support through the PPP, ultimately enough that has given us the lifeline that we're now growing on top of.
And you guys, I want to talk a bit about how you did a little bit of COVID pivoting, which was really smart, which probably maybe you were thinking of doing it all along, but when I saw you doing it, I was pretty excited. But just on firing people, I mean, this is something that some people just work at a startup, they touch it, it goes to gold, and they never had to fire anybody. Other times you have someone who starts looking downright dangerous, like going to hurt people, who's got to be fired. And then there's these other times when something potentially outside of your control happens, and it's either get more customers to get revenue in the door, get investors to get cash in the door that way, or lower expenses. And I've seen a lot of founders saying, I'm so proud, we never fired anybody, we never lowered any salaries. And in reality, if you do it long enough, you probably end up in that situation where you have to fire people. I remember firing about 90 people in one day myself. And I was probably 30, 31 years old. And so I didn't have any kids even. And I'm sensitive of I heard this guy just leased a car. We weren't able to tell him maybe you shouldn't lease that car, but he wasn't listening. And, I've seen, had to fire people where I see, a guy in his car crying in the parking lot 3 hours later. And he just had a baby. And I think of the Titanic. I think of the Titanic and say, should we sink every single man, woman, and child to the bottom of the ocean? Or should we, tell some people, look, the best thing I can do for you is to fire you, and you're marketable, and hopefully you can get another job and get through this. And we'll be so lucky to hire you back if we ever can. But firing, I think, is just think of that Titanic. Do we sink them all to the ocean, to the bottom of the ocean? Or do we save some going concern and even set people free, especially if you're in a place like the Valley? I want to talk about Chicago, but most of these people are so talented. My God, they can just snap their fingers and get a job. Hopefully. COVID, of course, extremely, extremely scary time.
Yeah.
To be doing it. So talk about the new product. So it's very clear what you guys were doing. You were on a tear, signing a term sheet with one of the biggest names in the entire venture capital world. And then all this happens. You make moves quick enough to not run out of cash. We've seen companies completely ostrich, ignore reality, and just keep paying until they wound it up, kind of stuff. Talk about new products that you introduced in this new work from home and hybrid or non-hybrid environment.
Yeah. So, first couple months of the pandemic, we're not thinking about new product lines as much. We're just thinking about survival. And once we sort of put those pieces in place, we started thinking about new product lines. And we built some criteria for what we wanted to prioritize. And so one of the pieces of criteria was utilizing existing customers. And we did see that a lot of competitors in our space were, pivoting into new customer segments, doing things like, grocery delivery. You're a food provider, so it seems like a logical thing. We saw a lot of companies pivot into, virtual events. But we were really focused on existing customers and recurring revenue. Those are two of the big criteria for us. And first thing we did is talk to our customers. It's the smartest thing anybody can do at really any point. We've got some great relationships with companies who've been with us since day one. And we started to understand what problems they were trying to solve. And the biggest problem was engagement. Everybody was working remote. They people were getting Zoom fatigue, and just showing employees that we still care about them and that, we still want to connect with them. And Zoom events were a great thing for a lot of time, but in also some instances, it's not great. People get Zoom fatigue and don't want to do all those events. And so the solution that we devised is a program called Crafty in a Box, where we're extending the in-office experience, the same food and beverage perks that we're providing in office to folks' home office. So at the same time that all these companies were allowing their employees to purchase, a new desk setup, we started by saying we also are going to extend the food and beverage component of the office experience to your home office. And we did it through, I think, a really great technique, which is we developed a thing called Crafty Credit, which is unlike a gift card in that it is virtual currency, but when you purchase it, it's only used on what is actually redeemed. So we allowed our clients to create virtual budgets for their individual employees to redeem on our platform, purchase product. And we've had some good success with that program, and now we're continuing to expand it as well. We think that it has the potential to become really the single source for all remote employee consumption beyond just food and beverage. We've launched work from home essentials products that do include the home office setup, the tools, but also include, IT equipment, health and wellness equipment, yoga mats, things like that. All in an effort to make the remote experience more pleasurable for those employees who are working away from the office.
I mean, I think, we were talking the other day about, Zoom, that like, if I had a lot of employees, I would ask them, do you have a good microphone? Do you have good lighting in there? I mean, I don't have the greatest, home studio, but like, I think, it's like, I heard at Accenture, my brother worked for Accenture decades ago. And he said he saw a guy wearing a short sleeve shirt with a tie, and a partner walked by, and blazer's off, and he goes, do you have a short sleeve blazer to go with that short sleeve shirt? If I see you that at Accenture ever again, you're out of here. Meaning, like, at Accenture, you're only as good as your people and how you look, and if people are doing a lot of Zoom and they can't hear you, or see you, that's an issue. So I think, I saw your online store. It reminded me a little bit of like a Sky Mall on like on an airline, where like these are a set of curated products. It's not everything on Amazon. There's not 8,000 microphones. It's more like, this is the desk, put your computer on top of this so people can see you better, kind of stuff. But it seemed like curated, work from home, and you guys are kind of positioned to potentially, lead in that market. I've seen people try to cash in on the work from home scene before, but I don't think they had the relationships that you've got already in place to be able to put that in front of the employees and let them make some decisions.
Yeah, and I think there's an integration between the in-office experience and the remote experience that needs to happen. And one of the propositions that we provide our clients is that we're their single partner for all consumption. And so when you think about providing a cohesive and consistent experience for the people who are in office, in addition to the people who are working from home, you need to have a partner who can coordinate those two distinct experiences that create one that is cohesive. So that is a huge part of our pitch, is in doing both. Like the in-office experience that we provide is not going anywhere. That's the core of what we do. And we are firm believers in the power of the in-office employee experience. By no means does it need to be 5 days a week. In fact, I think there's a lot of value in hybrid models. But I think the idea of the office going away, which very few people think, but like the office going away entirely is a terrible idea. And
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of the people, when I hear them, I'm like, that's the technical co-founder who just wants to be alone with his computer and, with headphones on all day long. And there's other people in a balanced organization that would thrive on a little bit of Steve Jobs. I met someone, we had an idea for Google News or something, a little social interaction. I think after all this lockdown, people can't wait to get back into some kind of normalcy. So Nate, you see all the different geographies. So what are you seeing? What's the difference between the different geographies and people responding to, I just got my double shot. I just got my second shot day before yesterday. of Pfizer. So it's like theoretically I should be back out there. Where do you see people dying to go to the office, and where do you see people, trying to work from home as long as they can?
Yeah, it's there's a couple different dependencies, and the answer is it depends. But you talk specifically about one of the dependencies, which is geography. Geography is a huge factor where, as you would expect, folks who are in New York City and have smaller apartments are a little more excited than the folks who are in suburban and rural areas and are activating this room in their house, which is now their home office, and they've got a lot of space. And so there's a little bit of geographic difference there. The other geographic difference is weather. And I think we're going to see that work from home or work in office patterns are very seasonal, especially as it relates to the geography. If it's snowing and I'm in Chicago, I probably don't want to go into the office.
Right.
But if it's nice outside, I probably do. So I think that's a big part of this geographic thing. The number one factor, though, is definitely your executive team. The folks who are setting the culture. Yeah. And, they have different needs, some of which are based on industry, but many of which are just based on their personal beliefs of what has built their company up to be the successful business that it is. And so like we talked about Jamie Dimon, you've got folks like that who are ardent believers in the power of the in-office experience, and they're going to require everybody to come back in office.
Yeah.
And though there are industry differences, there isn't like, okay, everybody in tech is now working remote. It really does depend. We see it across our client base. It's just different cultures of different companies that largely are a reflection of the people who are leading that company.
And you're an interesting source of information / news that's trustworthy since you're talking to people that are budgeting. When do you see things getting back to a normalcy, and how will it be different? What's your prediction post? There's BC before COVID and, AC after COVID.
Yeah, it's a gradual thing. I think a lot of people expect there to be like one day when everybody goes back to the office at the same time. And there will be moments where there's more traffic, but it's happening right now. Companies are slowly opening up and phasing in different capacities in their office. Specifically, though, I think for the dates that will be large milestones, September 1st or early September will be one unquestionably. And the beginning of next year will also be another one. So many of these things depend. I mean, we've been looking at different timelines that have constantly changed. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I said, there's no way this goes through June. So right. we might have a good data set, but I've been wrong this whole time.
Sure.
But that's what we're hearing.
Yeah, I remember Hong Kong, I deal with Hong Kong a lot, and we were seeing them rotate people through. So, you go to the office 2 days a week, and they were rotating people with some kind of social distancing. I don't know if that really works for Americans. They, culturally way different. At this point, Americans are like, give me the shot. There's no controlling anybody, maybe.
Yeah. I think also too, for the within the company, it's very departmental. There's a lot of revenue leaders who really believe in banging the gong and getting the sales team together and having that culture build up in person.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that doesn't exist with accounting, just to use another example. And so I think it's for the folks who are going into the office, it is largely departmental too. Of course, the first people to go in, the frontline workers of the office, are the workplace teams, the facilities teams. So they're the folks who have been going in this whole time and keeping the workplace in working condition and getting ready for having people back in the office. So, there are certain departments, and this gets back to how you think about hybrid work, but there are certain departments and job functions that work better remotely or in a hybrid fashion than those that really should be in office.
Sure. And talk about, you guys started the company in Chicago, and I know you just recently moved to New York City, but how is it? Did you feel advantages or disadvantages of being based in Chicago as opposed to San Francisco or New York or a bigger ecosystem? Or did you feel like you already had the network to get connected to all these investors?
I think, speaking for myself, I definitely had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about that too, because when we launched in the Bay Area, it was definitely, it was an uphill battle in the sense that we were not a Silicon Valley startup that maybe brings a lot of PR and press along with it around larger capital raises. In comparison to the other technology-oriented providers in our space, we've raised far less money. And I think that in many ways is, they're in Silicon Valley and we're in Chicago. But it's also largely culturally too, around our choices that we've made along the way. But the Chicago ecosystem is extremely powerful and growing. There are some incredible companies that we look up to in Chicago. Sure. And so there is a lot to be said for companies that are coming out of that geography that we think is, in many ways a good place to be successful.
Yeah, I think it was like 2013. I did a book tour for my first book. Is it 1871? Is that still around? That there's a ton of startups in there, and it felt exactly like Silicon Valley. Like whenever I go anywhere, it feels almost the same. Once you're in that, hub of all startups and VCs kind of vibe. And how hard is it for you to open up a new geography? So if you've got, I don't know, WeWork in Chicago, or Yelp wants you to support them here, or Groupon wants you to support them in another geography, how hard is it for you to turn that new one up?
So no longer is it as challenging as it was. Before the pandemic, our expansion model was largely focused on building our own distribution. So that would mean, leasing our own warehouse, hiring our own teams, and really operating the supply chain end to end in those markets. And right now, what we're doing is we're launching new markets through fulfillment partners and leveraging our technology and our management as what governs the client experience. So we have a great client services team. We have a great software and platform and technology team. And the power of those two things is what's really guiding a consistent experience across geographies, whether we're doing direct fulfillment or a fulfillment partner is providing the delivery.
Well, we've watched you, it was one of my questions when we made the original investment. I think you were only in Chicago, and we were wondering how hard is it going to be to hit different geographies for just a myriad of reasons, like sales being the least of them. But it seems like you've really proven that you can do that with, I still think it's like a miracle that you guys were able to make all those moves, which are hard decisions to, what was it, 130 people down to 50. And I know you guys probably weren't paying yourselves, every day, throughout that, but it seems like you really made it through. Did you at least get rid of some competitors along the way? I mean, did COVID did you see any competitors just fall off the map?
Yeah. There were a couple companies that, we've heard didn't make it through. And I think that's unfortunate in the sense that they didn't really do anything wrong. It just sort of this happened to them. Yeah. And we easily could have been one of them too. We're Sure. really lucky in the sense that we are where we are today. But the competitive dynamics of our market are different. Now also where we compete is largely against the national providers, of which, there are a couple sort of old stalwarts in our industry who have been, really dominating for many, many years as, one of the only truly national partners. And so now we're getting the opportunity to compete with them in a bigger way than we did when we were just in Chicago or in the Bay Area. So that's been really exciting for us, because though in some instances the office market has shrunk, our total addressable market has grown tremendously. Our average contract value has grown tremendously. And so despite sort of some dynamics working against us, we have a couple other dynamics that are really tailwinds for us that we're excited and fortunate to be riding.
Well, that's the funny thing. When you look at COVID, like reducing the number of people that could travel or something, the startup itself, and I'm talking about any startup that we're involved in, was probably growing like crazy anyway. So they're growing into maybe some bad macroeconomic things, but they were still landing and expanding. They were still landing and expanding. They were still grabbing new logos. So the growth can still happen. You moving to New York, I'm excited to see what you can do there with all of our connections, introducing you guys. I guess it's just, how much can you guys do at this point? I look forward to that next financing round and seeing what comes next. But so you started off in beer, then you got into food. Now you're into kind of all the kit of a home office. Anything else we should be expecting to see that you can talk about now, or what's the next thing for us to look at with Crafty?
Yeah, we have definitely a couple angles that we're working on. I think at our core, what we want to become is the platform for employee consumption. And so it goes beyond food and beverage, and it goes beyond the in-office experience. And we're on our way to doing that. So yeah, that's definitely how we think about us. Hopefully being extremely competitive in the B2B2C space.
Perfect. Okay, well, Nate, man, great to see you. Hope to see you soon. And what is the website for Crafty?
So our main website's craftydelivers.com, and our remote platform is box.craftydelivers.com.
Perfect. Okay, man. All right. Well, thanks so much and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Okay, later.